Hi everybody, this is Heath Close with Buildbox, and I'd like to welcome you to part 3 of our 3-part series on making isometric games in Buildbox. In part 3, we are going to build out our game using the isometric assets we made in part 2. If you are new to using Buildbox, or if there is anything I cover in this video that is unfamiliar to you, I have the perfect series of tutorials for you called the Make Your Own Game series, where I take you through making a game from start to finish and can be found at buildbox.com/makeyourown-game. So let's start up Buildbox and click on Create New in the upper left of the Welcome window. This will bring up the creator. Buildbox already has a preset for the kind of game we want to make, so select the ISO Jump preset and click Create. The first thing that you will notice is that the preset plays at an angle different than what we want. So we need to go up into the menu editor and click on our world to select it and change the game direction to 30. Now, double clicking on the game world, let's tidy up our preset by taking out what we don't need so we can make this game our own. Now that we're left with a blank start scene, let's start by dragging in our platform graphic. Buildbox will present us with the drag and drop wheel, and we want our platform to be an object. So the first thing is, let's get our platform aligned to the left side of our screen using the soft white device guide. 135 on the x-axis and 420 on the y-axis will work perfectly unless you made your platforms differently than I did in part 2. We need to get our collision shape set up correctly for our platform. So let's drag in our guide we made in part 2 and drop it on the object option. Making sure the guide is selected, cut it to the clipboard with either Command X or Control X. Now we will select our platform in the Asset panel to the left, and in the Options panel to the right, we are going to edit the default animation. Once the animation editor is open, paste our guide with either Command V or Control V and place it on our platform in the manner in which we set it up in part 2. This now will give us a nice, easy way to get our collision shape right. Closing the animation editor, let's edit the collision shape of the platform by going to the Options panel to the right and clicking on Edit Collision Shape. Now we can use our guide to get a nice straight line with our collision shape with very little hassle. The bottom doesn't need much attention as it won't be used for detecting collision. Closing the collision shape editor, let's go back into the default animation of the platform and delete our handy guide. Now let's select our platform and duplicate it using D and line it up to extend our surface, holding down Shift while we drag it to keep the object in a straight line. You can make fine adjustments with the arrow keys if that's easier. Let's repeat the process until we have 4 sections of our platform, as this was a quarter section from part 2. Let's lock these down so we don't accidentally move them, and adjust our scene length. If you have been following along and creating your assets with the same dimensions thus far, let's make this start scene 1240 pixels long, as this will line up well with a duplicate of itself. Finding this number can take a few minutes of trial and error, but this is the number I found that works well to repeat this scene without gaps or overlap. Now we can select the start scene again and hit D to duplicate it. Once we have done that, go to Edit, Randomize Scenes. This will force Scene 1 to repeat forever during this tutorial. Let's bring in our player now. Just drag the graphic into Buildbox on the Player option in the drag and drop wheel. Let's adjust its collision shape by selecting it in the Assets panel to the far left, and then in the Options panel to the far right, we'll click on Edit Collision Shape. For our game, we only need to be able to detect a collision at the front of our character and at the back. So a shape like this will get the job done. It's okay if you don't understand that collision shape yet. It will make more sense in just a bit. Let's close the collision shape editor and drag our player to our desired starting point and adjust our game frame. Remember, yellow lines block the character, red ones kill the character, and gray ones follow the character. If you have never made your game frame that small, this is how you would get the camera to keep your player centered. If we hit play right now without setting up our character to be an ISO jumper, you will see the effect a game frame that small has on the game view. As long as the game frame is gray, the camera follows the character. Keep this in mind for future reference. Let's hide our game frame now so we don't accidentally move it or change the gray bars to red and spend the next 45 minutes trying to figure out why the game goes right to the Game Over menu. Now let's set up settings on our character. Selecting the character in the Assets panel to the far left will reveal its settings in the Options panel to the far right. Let's scroll down and change its max speed to 75 on both the X and Y axes. Let's get rid of that bounce force that was showing off our tiny game frame a moment ago. And let's put a check mark in fixed rotation. Just in case we nick a collision shape on our platform, it doesn't go spinning out of control. In order to make sure we have minimum impact on our character in the event we do hit a collision shape on the platform, let's set up an advanced move that will apply itself at the start of this level. We will set it up so the character is responsible for its own angle of movement and not rely on the collision shape of the platforms to keep it on a path. If done right, these platforms can then just be decorations, and the character will never deviate from its course. I use hitting a collision shape on the platform as a standard, but the real reason we want to achieve this is because when we add another component later that is actually going to move our collision shape for us to simulate jumping over something at this perspective, we have the proper control of our character path, because if we don't, our character can deviate from the path enough to end up below the platforms at the end of the jump. So we want to take a few moments and figure out the right velocity settings at this point. So at the bottom of the character settings in the lower right, let's click on Add Component and Advanced Move. Let's drag our player graphic into the animation slot and edit the collision shape. And give it a speed of 75 in the X-axis. And have a play around with the Y-axis number, but I generally start at -10. Let's see how that affects our character. If -10 on the Y-axis isn't correct, you will see our character deviate from its path. Let's adjust it until it follows the collision shape of the platform without increasing the space between the collision shape of the platform and the collision shape of the character. Now let's add our ability to jump. For this, we want to use a ghost jump component. So in the lower right, let's click on Add Component, Ghost Jump. Let's set our jump velocity Y value to about 400 and jump gravity Y value to about twice that. Let's set our jump speed to 4 and our duration to 0.75. And we'll increase that to 1 if it's too hard to jump over our enemy. You can have a play with all these settings to get your player to behave as you see fit, but this should give you a good starting point. Now, down where it says Event, let's pick the button that was put on our game UI when we picked this preset and drag our character graphic into the animation slot. Now let's edit the collision shape. If you've never used Ghost Jump before, the main purpose of this component is to allow the character to have a certain animation, and in our case, it's just the same graphic as our default animation, but it allows a character to have a certain animation while changing the collision shape, and more specifically, we want to move our collision shape out of the way of the enemy during a jump. This is how we quote fake perspective in our jump. Let's select a circle collision shape for this character and make it real small and move it clear out of the way of our enemy. Now let's have a look at what that does for us. As you can see, when we jump, our collision shape changes to the circle and is clear from anything on our path. So let's set something on our path to jump over. Let's select Scene 1 and bring our enemy in. Just drag the graphic in and drop it on the Object option in the drag and drop wheel. We can adjust its collision shape to mimic our own, but with a small change, since we want the front of our shape to be dangerous to the player. Let's place it close to the collision shape of our platform, making sure it is below the character in the scene's asset list so it is rendered behind our character on the Z-axis. Another reason we want the enemy to cause a player fail right when it touches the player. Let's also make sure it is set to enemy. Now when we play our game, we will have an enemy to avoid. A few final touches to make concerning a player fail, like game over delay, a tiny bit of camera shake, and a physics-based defeated animation, and our simple isometric game is complete. I hope this helps you in your endeavors to make isometric games with Buildbox. Stop by the Buildbox forums and let us know how you're getting on with your isometric creations. Thank you for joining me, and I'll see you next time.